Scrum is not the problem. Scrum is not what's making your life miserable at work. Scrum is not a flawed process, and Scrum does not have a fatal flaw. Scrum is not perfect, but while the title of this video may be inflammatory, almost every single complaint about Scrum you will find on the internet has nothing to do with Scrum itself. It has to do with the person complaining, the company they are in, or the management they are dealing with. All over the internet you'll find article after article after article stating that Scrum is terrible, Scrum has failed, Scrum is not agile. And all of those people are wrong because fundamentally, Scrum exists to provide best practices on achieving agility, nothing more. The problem always comes down to the implementation of Scrum within the organization. So what exactly is Scrum? The exact definition from the 14-page guidebook created by Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland states, Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. The goal of Scrum is allowing teams to practice the 3 empirical pillars that the founders think is the most important for creating an empirical and lean thinking environment, while following an iterative and incremental approach to product development. Those 3 pillars are transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Ken and Jeff have also created a set of 5 Scrum values, which will be important to the rest of this video. Those 5 values are commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. Scrum involves organizing people into teams of 10 or fewer people, containing a Scrum Master, a Product Owner, and a group of developers. Scrum operates using a series of 4 different ritualized meetings to complete a work cycle, known as a sprint. Those 4 meetings are daily Scrum, commonly known as stand-ups, sprint planning, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. The sprint planning meeting kicks off each new cycle where the work to be completed is agreed upon and discussed. The sprint review is where the work that was completed in the previous sprint is demoed to stakeholders. The sprint retrospective exists for the teams to reflect on what went well, what went poorly, and how the team as a whole can improve going forward. The daily stand-ups exist to allow developers to communicate about how it is going and what adjustments need to be made in order to achieve the goals of the sprint. This is very much a simplified version of what is listed in the Scrum Guide, but we'll go into it in more detail later in the video to address the various criticisms of Scrum that are raised by a lot of developers. Let's start with the most common complaint, which is that the Scrum Master and the Product Owner don't understand programming.
The product owner is not even acquainted with coding most of the time. He's done a course. The Scrum Master is, who knows what kind of role they've been in before. Maybe some business analytical role. What's he got to do with software development? Often you find they don't have the right skills to control a software project.
Another commenter on Stack Overflow says that the alternative is to get the non-technical people out of the process. The problem is you can't do that. You need to focus on the business goals and achieving the business's needs. And if you remove all the non-technical people from the process, who's going to handle the business people? Who's going to understand what needs to be done? And who's going to go about prioritizing? The business world is not a free-for-all where you get paid $150,000 a year for doing nothing and delivering nothing. And this is a common refrain in a lot of comments we see.
Developers become part of a mindless micro-conveyor belt. It becomes about ticking cards.
Another commenter says that coding is a creative process like writing or painting. Coding isn't a factory process where you can just expect production. Coding is a creative process and you need to nurture creative minds because then you get the innovative ideas, the new money makers. But this is a person in the same comment who said, I'm not a salesperson and I don't really get motivated by money. I would just want to create something beautiful, stable, useful. The problem with this approach is that developers are getting paid an absolute fortune. And the only way they can justify that expense is by consistently putting out quality code. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be good quality and lead in the right direction for the business. And you can't just let someone spend 6 months developing whatever they want because that's not guaranteed to make money. There needs to be a direction and a driver behind it.
The ones that do not have to be accountable, the Scrum Master and the Product Owner, well, they don't have to fill in anything. They don't have to have the burn down charts for their stuff.
This is completely incorrect. A product owner who cannot create a successful product will not be retained by the business and will have a negative reputation going forward. A Scrum Master who cannot successfully create a Scrum team and have them achieve high results will also not have that same reputation going forward and will be let go by the company. By the same token, however, Nobody measures the success of developers by how the product does. It's much more on how you do in interviews and who you know and what skill sets you develop. Your product can be an absolute bust, yet you can still be high in demand if you have the right technology or the right stack you've worked with, or you've met the right people and made the right connections. So it's important to remember that there's multiple perspectives in every situation. Our next comment says, Jason, I completely agree with you. Just add all the time spent in daily stand-up meetings. It's supposed to be 30 minutes. Well, let's stop you there. The Scrum Guide very specifically says the stand-up should be no more than 15 minutes. If your stand-up is 30 minutes long, you're already not following Scrum.
And at the end of a repetitive iteration, you're sequestered by, well, the Holy Father for confessions. And you have to give them the ammunition to use against you in the next iteration again. Oh, sorry, I didn't manage to finish the card because. And then they throw that back at you again in the next iteration. None of it is real.
While I have absolutely no doubt that a lot of bad management and bad companies use the retrospective as a method to attack developers, that's not the point of the retrospective. The point of the retrospective is to understand why work did not get done so it can be fixed in future iterations. This means that maybe the estimation was wrong. Maybe there are some technical debt problems that need to be addressed. Or maybe it's one of those scenarios where the scope of the project was too small, whether there would need to be more tickets or a wider understanding of the problem, or whether it's purely because the scope itself did not fully encapsulate the work that was trying to be done. This normally means that the dependencies of the feature were not fully understood, whether that was within the software itself, with third-party API connections, or some other scope issue. For example, a UI component that was not understood, or pieces were missing that were thought to be there, which can happen on software projects.
Design is out the window. You can't sit back and say, I'm going to have a week or so to design something, and I'm going to implement it, and I'm going to get people to look at it from an API standpoint and see if they can use it properly. And then I'm going to reiterate that and then come up with something good. And if it didn't take 5 days and it took 7, so what? Right? If it took 10 days, so what? Are you building quality? Do you want something to go out well? Do you want something good out there that actually works? In environments where I can see the end goal 3 months from now, and if we only sat back and took 2 weeks now, we could have solved all those problems, but instead...
That's the whole point of spike tickets. And there's nothing within the Scrum Guide that says you can't create tickets that are purely to solve design or technical problems, to address architecture issues, concerns, planning. So if you need to take a sprint or half a sprint to try and work on a design problem, there's nothing within the Scrum Guide or the Scrum planning that says you can't do that. It's not purely about churning out tickets over and over again. And I feel sorry if you worked in that environment, because that's not the point.
So good design is marginalized. I mean, that's absolutely true. You'll find that design just takes a back seat every single time. Everything that is not done correctly is regarded as, we'll refactor that later. And that's what it becomes, a refactoring excuse. And if it can't be refactored, or it's too complicated, too solid, too architectural, well, then suddenly it becomes something part of the backlog, and we'll deal with that at some other time.
This isn't a Scrum problem. This isn't my business is cheap, lazy, and willing to cut corners to complete projects as quickly as possible. That's a management problem, a company problem, not a Scrum problem. Another developer states that whenever I say that Scrum Agile is garbage, the Scrum lovers always love to say that I'm doing it wrong. Whether my former employers were doing it right or wrong, it makes no difference. Simply stated, Scrum, or any Agile methodology for that matter, cuts corners and admits some of the things that we were supposed to do in order to develop software properly. Lack of certain documentation is number one on the list. Massive technical debt and garbage code are also major issues. Engineers like me want to be given our marching orders, given the project due date, and let loose on what we do best. This just simply doesn't make sense in the world of MVPs. It's not to say you can't say, okay, we need 3 months to build the MVP, it's got to have XYZ feature, and we need to go from there. There still needs to be check-ins, there still needs to be an understanding that everything is on track, and there still needs to be an understanding that everyone is aligned. And the problem is a lot of software developers are terrible at talking to each other. I do get a bit of a laugh when he says that Scrum puts the kibosh on our creativity when it comes to develop algorithms. How often in programming are you actually developing algorithms? The vast majority of the times you're making functions, you're making connections, you're making APIs, maybe a little bit of math, you're doing some behind the scenes to connect things together. You're not actually developing algorithms. You're not creating new hash tables or new hash maps. You're not reinventing the wheel. That's not how this works. If your job is developing algorithms, then you're much more likely to be in a research role than you are in a company role. The vast majority of companies do not need some brand new algorithm. They're perfectly happy with bog standard algorithms that will get them the solutions they need. What they're really trying to do is build the connections, build the APIs, integrate with other software to expand their feature reach. Unless you're the Michelangelo of today, the vast majority of paying clients for sculptures are demanding it on a certain timeline because they have a reason they asked for it. Now maybe if you're a fantastic, unbelievable sculptor, then they're happy to just get your sculpture when you finish. But the vast majority have to have it done on a certain timeline. And the same is true with software.
It assumes developers need herding into a production line. It facilitates micromanagement. It allows management not to manage, but look at charts and pretend they're managing.
While it's true that people management and product management are two different things, a lot of software does need product management, which is what the charts are for.
It reduces the team's ability to innovate and design things themselves and actually work for themselves and be able to do stuff. So you're taking away their responsibility and in a way, their accountability, and instead replacing it with cards and ticking, right?
This is a sign of a dictatorial shop, not a Scrum shop.
Developers are made somehow more accountable, but by numbers that don't mean anything. Like, how many cards have you done? Have you finished these cards? Like, how many outstanding? I mean, it's these things don't matter. A card doesn't express the complexity.
That's the entire point of estimation. The estimation is supposed to give everyone around the understanding of what the complexity of the card or ticket represents. The point is that the card leads towards a new feature, a new enhancement, something that's going to make the product better. So in that sense, you are being mal-evaluated by something that matters the most, which is the business outcome. This comment from Matt says it best. As a product owner who is also a developer, I can confidently say that developers, good ones and poor ones, will complain about any process that requires them to be transparent and accurately estimate time. Scrum and Agile are herrings here. The name of the process doesn't matter. There is a sort of fantasy on the part of the developer where they should just be able to lock themselves in a room, put on headphones, and code for 6 months without anyone actually tracking their progress or demonstrating value to stakeholders. All of this while, of course, being paid very well by the business. And this is a problem that's continuing to get worse and worse. I've spoken to several engineering managers, and they're saying that university graduates, 22 years old, maybe 1 or 2 internships, are demanding over $100,000 minimum in salary, not including any other benefits. And while if you're working for a FANG company, this may be expected, you're probably going to get paid even more. For the average shop, for the average company that needs developers, that's just way too much to ask, especially for a completely unproven quantity. And this is a problem that's just going to continue getting worse. The expectations are out of whack, and developers need to realize that they are accountable for the work they put out and the work that they do. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. If you didn't like the video, please give me a comment and we can discuss it down below. Thank you.